Okay, let's track the latest as it relates to this story right here. We've been following details as the Trump administration announced today that the U.S. seized an oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. This comes as tensions continue to mount with the government of President Nicolás Maduro. Reuters saying that U.S. forces seized this tanker in an incredibly unusual move. It marks the Trump administration's latest push to increase pressure on Maduro. Standing by is retired Marine intelligence officer, national security analyst, and host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer. He's here. He previously worked the war on drugs under U.S. Southern Command. Southern Command follows, and really Southern Command's jurisdiction is this exact territory that we're talking about. This is yet another push of pressure against the Maduro government, Hal. Reuters calls this an incredibly unusual move. How unusual is this?
You know, Austin, it is unusual, and one of the reasons that it's being done is simply because we have the forces there to do it. In many cases, these tankers, these sometimes called dark tankers are involved in various smuggling of sanctioned oil and things like that, which is what this tanker is accused of doing. They go in and out. They don't get stopped because we just simply don't have the forces on hand to do the interdiction. In this case, that tanker came out of the port in Venezuela, and we have this massive naval armada out there and everything that we need to stop it. And technically, and I'm not sure if those were Coast Guardsmen that were actually rappelling onto the ship, could have been Navy SEALs, or could have been, Marine Raiders, or it could have been any mix that went on the ship. But the vessel is actually being seized by the U.S. Coast Guard, and it's being held. It's somewhat unusual. It's big. It's about 1.1 million barrels of oil on that tanker. That's more than the daily output of Venezuela. So it's a lot of oil, but it is a very forceful enforcement of some of the sanctions that we have on oil-producing countries.
So Trump said today, and I'm reading this, he said, quote, "We've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela. It's a large tanker, very large, largest one we've ever seized, actually." He says it was seized for a very good reason. We heard from Kash Patel later on. He posted this on social media saying, "The FBI and partners executed a seizure warrant for a crude oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela. They say it was used to transport sanctioned oil from Venezuela to Iran. They say the tanker has been used in recent years in an illicit shipping network supporting foreign terrorist organizations." So, Hal, is this the very good reason that President Trump is talking about? Could there be any other reasons?
Actually, there are very good reasons. Part of it is it focuses on Iran and Iranian oil and sanctioned Iranian oil, particularly now under the snapback provisions that have kicked back in on Iran. So that's part of it. Part of it is looking at that, and you can bet that we have a lot of ways that this has been identified, not just by the U.S., but by other countries involved with illegal shipments of oil from Iran to various different other places. I would not be surprised if we find out that this was involved with ship-to-ship transfers at sea, which are very hazardous, potentially causing significant environmental damage. That could have been some of the stuff done. This particular load, though, was coming out of Venezuela, was supposed to be going up to Cuba, and then it was going to get transshipped, from what I can tell, probably over to China. But it was bringing sanctioned oil out, and the U.S. stopped it, and it had been linked to a number of other illegal maritime activities, and that was probably enough. And there's also a report out that the individual that either owns the ship or owns the cargo, wasn't quite clear to me, is linked to Maduro and other senior Venezuelan officials. He's shown up on a list as someone who's been targeted with sanctions. And of course, Maduro and his senior leadership are tied to Cartel de Solis, which we have declared to be a terrorist organization. Hence, you see the connection to terrorism, not just terrorism coming out of Iran, but terrorism tied to the narco cartels, particularly the drug cartels in Venezuela.
You're looking at the same footage I'm looking at right now. What's your reaction to seeing U.S. forces going down and seizing this tanker? We're seeing the actual footage, Hal.
I mean, it's a standard operation. I've done that many times. They're just helicopter comes in, they fast rope down, and they're executing the way the way that they're trained, and they're operationally focused on doing that. We have a number of forces that are very good at doing this type of ship takedown, if you will. If that know exactly what they're doing in this regard. So it's every operation you have to do a lot of prep and a lot of planning for. But we certainly have the forces at hand to pull something like this off without too much trouble. And that's one of the reasons that it was stopped. And in all candor, many times these tankers don't get stopped because we just simply don't have the forces on hand to do the interdiction. In this case, we had plenty of forces on hand to do the interdiction, and it makes a huge statement. Now, as you know, we've been doing lethal strikes on semi-submersibles and go-fast boats that have been carrying loads of drugs and taking them out. That's one way of slowing this. That's one way of stopping or staunching the supply of drugs coming to the United States and to our allies around the world. But now we've actually stopped a tanker. Now, could there be drugs on that tanker? Possibly. It doesn't sound like that was any of the reasons that we stopped the tanker, although I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to search the tanker very thoroughly to find out if there's any other contraband, anything else on that tanker as well. And there could be other reasons. There could be something else. It could be a person or persons on that tanker that they know of that they want to, that they'd like to stop and interview or hold for a period of time, depending on who's on board. So there could be a lot of reasons. They said, basically they indicated that there were more than one reason for why this was done. And I would imagine that there are more than one reason.
So we were just looking at videos of some of the strikes on those smaller boats. Why is it that that the move here is to seize a large tanker like this? Why isn't the move to seize those smaller drug boats? Why do they strike those?
Well, the smaller drug boats are a lot harder to seize. That tanker is not moving very fast. You can go out there and do that fast rope thing on a tanker. You cannot do that fast rope thing on a go fast boat doing 40 to 50 knots in the middle of the night, shooting across the Caribbean with a bunch of drugs on board and potentially armed individuals, 3 or 4 armed individuals on board the boat. That's just not going to happen. It's just not an operation. It's not an exercise that you can actually do. And that's one of the problems with stopping go fast boats. That's one of the reasons that drug cartels use go fast boats, is because it is simply physically difficult, if not impossible, to interdict these boats for these short loads. They'll shoot out across the Caribbean. They'll make a run of several nautical miles. But they'll go to an island, and then they'll offload that, then they'll transport it and transship it to somewhere else. And it gets very difficult to do this because they make these fast runs, or they'll use the very low profile semi-submersibles, which are very difficult to pick up on radar. And they'll do a route, which is a route that's difficult to stop because you got a tremendous amount of ocean out there that you're trying to find them in. And so, this is just not something that they can really do. And yes, there is that famous Coast Guard video of a Coast Guardsman. They're telling the semi-submersible to stop, and then they actually jump on top of the semi-submersible while it's underway, pound on the hatch, and the crew comes out. But that's a very dangerous operation. Everybody looks at that. They kind of give a thumbs up to the Coast Guardsman. That was very, very bold and courageous thing. But on the other hand, a lot of stuff can go wrong there. And so that's one of the reasons that when they see them, they've made the determination legally that they're carrying dangerous drugs. We've kind of put the dangerous drugs in the category of almost weapons of mass destruction, as if they're chemical weapons, which is one of the ways we kind of characterize the lethality of the drug shipment and part of the justification for why we use lethal force in stopping those drugs.
You and I have been talking almost nightly about the U.S. upping its pressure campaign on Nicolás Maduro. It started with the strikes on boats. It continued as military resources continued to build up in the area surrounding Venezuela. The world's largest aircraft carrier is stationed out there. And now this, Hal. How much does the seizure of a tanker like this, how much pressure is this exerting on Maduro?
Well, it's putting a lot of pressure. Without getting into the details, you're looking at a tanker with over 1 million barrels of oil. And that is, the two big things, if you will, the two big export items coming out of Venezuela is oil and drugs, essentially. And that's how the government makes its money. So we've been really halting the flow of illegal drugs by all the strikes on the small boats, the go fast boats and the semi-submersibles. Now we've stopped a tanker, a fairly large tanker coming out of there. And it's got to put a lot of doubt in their minds, which is, will the U.S. stop other tankers? And there frankly isn't another way to get that oil out of Venezuela. It's got to come out through tankers. Now, I would point out something else, which may be something tied to this. The environmental standards in the Venezuelan ports are very poor. And so there may be some environmental reasons why they are environmental justification for stopping this tanker. It could have been involved in some sort of marine pollution issue or maritime pollution issue. I don't rule that out. And a lot of times the tankers coming out of there won't be allowed into various ports because they're just so contaminated with oil that they've picked up from the port. So that may actually be another justification for why that's happening. But with any shipper now looking at going in to pick up oil from Venezuela, they're going to have to think twice. Do I want to send my tanker in there? Will it be seized? And when a tanker is seized, whether or not it's, at some point it'll probably be released, but just being seized and held for 30, 60, 90 days, that's a phenomenal loss of revenue for any maritime shipper and for any shipping company. And so that puts a huge deterrence on anybody even doing business with Venezuela, putting their ships at risk by going in there and picking up Venezuelan oil.
What does a seizure mean for the people that were already on that boat?
Well, it gets to be a really long day. They're going to be essentially detained. Often they will be detained on the ship. Depends on the circumstances, depends on whether we need them for witnesses or whatever. Depends if some of them are facing criminal charges. That sometimes happens when they inspect the ship or basically search the ship, and then they look through all the paperwork and everything else. They may find things that lead to criminal indictment of the master, possibly the other officers aboard the ship. So that's not uncommon that those things will happen, but they would be detained for quite some time. They could be potentially detained in the U.S. or some other location. A lot of times they just keep them on ship. They'll just take the ship somewhere. The ship will stay there. Put some sort of guard force on the ship, and they'll just stay on the ship as a crew, and that could be really long. Sometimes they'll be on there for weeks, months, extremely long time.
Hal Kempfer joining us, lending some context to this developing situation. We're going to have to continue to track closely. Hal is the host of the Strap podcast. You can listen to it anywhere podcasts are available. Thanks, Hal.